Hello and good day. I'm really excited to have you here with the Prism of Perspective Podcast. And today we're going to be having a great conversation with a good friend of mine, Max Spitzer. Max is a world traveler who spent most of his 20s traveling all over the world, as far as Antarctica. Actually spent a fair amount of time down there. I think he was sunbathing or something. And then returned from his world travels as he turned 30 to pursue his lifetime dream of becoming a life coach. He's passionate about helping men really thrive in all areas of their lives. In fact, one of the things he's working on right now is developing groups where men think about how do they really pursue their integrated lives so that they're thriving in all different areas. He's passionate about health. He's passionate about making a difference in the world. He's passionate about reading and strength training and loves his life. He lives in Boulder. And he and his significant other, Sydney, enjoy spending a lot of time outside in nature. They love live music. And they also love their American bulldog named Chance. So with all that, welcome, Max. Nice to see you.
Thank you for having me, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
Really my pleasure. As I was launching this podcast, I thought of you as somebody that for many different reasons, would be interesting to have this conversation about perspective, because I saw that, when you and I had become friendly prior to your world travels and the way you were thinking about how that would really engage you and give you different perspectives. And so that was on the front side, but we also have an opportunity to say, well, how did it really work out, right? And how did living around the world impact your view and perspectives? So let's dive into your world travels first. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it all started when I was probably 7 or 8. I was in class, I was daydreaming, saw this video on TV, and it was the rolling hills of New Zealand. And I had never even heard of New Zealand at that time. And I just, in that moment of seeing it, I said, I got to go there. And that always was on the back of my mind. And I went to college and I wanted to be a life coach. And when I met you, I was like, this is the perfect opportunity. You were my mentor at that time and going down that road. And I just realized, as much as I want to do this, I really feel like I need to travel the world, and I really want to go to New Zealand and I want to experience this. And so I made the difficult decision, but very worthy. And I was so thankful at that time to have your guidance as well. And I decided to travel the world, and I got a one-way ticket to New Zealand. I was living with what I call a heart-centered belief, just following my heart. And that very first flight from Miami to Dallas started a whole chain of events that came full circle, which allowed me to work in Antarctica, and had an amazing time in my 20s. And to kind of bring that full circle, as much as that was fun, I realized that I wanted to do something a little bit more fulfilling, and that life coach had always been there in the back of my mind throughout my travels. And so approached my 30th birthday, I decided to say, hey, I'm going to put this to rest, at least for now, and come back to the States and pursue that. And but I was so much richer for having traveled. That taught me a lot about what I could bring into experiences in life. So
let's lay there for a little while and think about that. A couple things. One is like the ideas and the beliefs that had you excited about making that journey, and then also using that same frame and thinking about how did your experiences influence and impact the beliefs you have so that you can continue to make decisions out of that. Tell me a little more about the beliefs and how they've motivated you.
Yeah, so it was interesting because the beliefs aspects of it, there were so many beliefs of, okay, should I do this? And I know I want to do this. This is in my heart. And then there was the society beliefs of, okay, you're putting your career on the side, you're doing all these things. And so beliefs come up quite frequently, and asking myself, okay, well, how much of this is centered in a belief that's intrinsic within myself, or how much of this is outside of me, saying, listen to the world and listen to what they're saying. So the belief aspect was really interesting, because as I was learning about Prism of Perspective with you prior to traveling, it really allowed me to test those muscles. And then when you start to travel and you're living in different countries and you're experiencing different things, a lot of your so-called assumptions about life can be challenged. And you realize that people live much differently than you. And so it was really interesting, I guess, from my belief standpoint of testing and recalibrating, what is it that I truly believe in? What is it that I truly believe about myself and my capabilities within the world and within, my travels? So Yeah, it was, I don't know if that quite answered.
Yeah, I think that's cool. So let's stay with that. So there's a couple different things you hit on as I see it. One is the identity beliefs, right? So what was it that you believed about yourself, your self-efficacy, your idea that, you know what, I can go heart-centered and go to New Zealand and really just be willing to experience. So that's a belief that you had that around your competence and confidence in that. And then there's also beliefs that we have globally that we might look at. Like, what do you believe about people in the world? You know, because you have to have a certain amount of faith and belief in their goodness in ways that some people may not, right? So if you're living in a lot of fear, that would have been a really impossible or a thought that wouldn't have really crossed your mind. So let's kind of look a little bit about the identity beliefs that gave you that confidence and what your thoughts were going into traveling the world, and maybe even how they were influenced while traveling the world.
Yeah, so that's a great point. So I'm glad you brought up the identity piece. So the one thing that I knew with my identity is I could make this work. I didn't know how. I didn't know. I literally had no idea, but I knew that I could make it work. And the beautiful thing about that, John, is every time I tested that just a little bit, I would, buy the one-way ticket. Then I would look into, okay, where am I going? The universe conspired. I mean, every single time. The stories that I have are just, you can't make them up. It was just time after time again, whether it's running into somebody and they just so happen to know somebody else. And I ran into the woman in front of me, ended up allowing me to go to Antarctica. So the identity that I had for myself was very, very rooted in a strong belief that I can make this work. And that allowed everything else to happen. And the world identity, though, was constantly being updated at all points in time. But it was interesting because as I continued to believe in myself and see the good in the world, that's how I chose to see, is that every human and every experience that I had was an amazing opportunity to learn and grow. It just made the whole experience that much richer. And I can't help but to believe that belief in the world and the world being good ultimately made my experiences out of this world.
Right. I mean, our beliefs are prophecies of what we're going to experience. Right. I was listening to a podcast actually today, and they were talking about the way that the mind works to essentially error detect, right? So you have a perception of how things are going to go, and then there's a little bit of error detection, but really what we're doing is we're seeing what we expect to see. And so when you go into the world and you have a belief and faith in other humanity, it gives you the opportunity to trust that I can lean into this and I'm going to be okay. Right. And then the other part of it is also just having a certain amount of confidence in yourself. You know, as a younger person in the 20s, a lot of people are not feeling comfortable that I'm going to go across the world. I'm going to go to Antarctica. I'm going to spend time there. I'm going to do these things that are out of the norm and not be concerned, like you said, about like what society thinking about me right now. And is this really going to be decisions that I feel great about in retrospect, right? You kind of have to stay in the present moment and make them experiences that in retrospect end up being great.
You couldn't have said it better. And it reminds me of the reticular activating system, kind of what you're hoping to see and what you're planning, and the beliefs in that allow the opportunities before you to you're seeing them, you're identifying
right
them.
So if we look at the prism of perspective, that's the whole idea, right? That you have these beliefs on the front side, and that life comes at us like white light with everything there, but depending on what we expect to see, it filters that out, and we end up creating our expectations. And so why it's so critical that we have these positive, optimistic internal locus of control where we feel like we're going to be okay, right? We're going to be able to manage this. Whatever the challenge is, I can grow and learn rather than I'm limited. And so, in order to make those bolder steps, we really have to have confidence in our ability to roll. So that's great for you. Let's talk about the energy piece of it, right? Because the bottom part of the pyramid is all around energy, and it's about, your exercise and nutrition, your mindset, your ability to get into flow. All of those things give you the energy to do what it is you want to do. Tell me a little bit about how energy was showing up for you as you were in the 20s, going through those different elements and, living in different places where different foods prevalent and, different things are available to you. How'd that show up?
Yeah. So the energy piece is fascinating for me because I actually heard a quote, and I'm probably going to butcher it here, but it was something along the lines from Bruce Lee. And he says something along the lines of, the more energy I give, or the more I expend, the more I receive. And so what's fascinating about traveling, I'd say I have a huge emphasis on health, and I'm always trying to figure out the next greatest biohack and greatest aspect to improve my body. And it's interesting because when you're traveling, you have your entire life on your backpack. It can be very difficult to try to find those habits and those routines to kind of foster what I would consider a good sleeping schedule, or
right.
if you're traveling and you're going different time zones. So for me, it was very fascinating to try to understand energy from a point of whatever the world's throwing at you, you still have the greatest say in what it is that you choose to respond to that, how it is you choose to show up. You can be tired, but if a saber-tooth tiger was coming out of the bush, you're going to find the energy to move forward in life.
Wow, you traveled back in time too, huh?
Exactly. Not as hairy as they used to be back then, but yeah, it was just fascinating because it allowed an opportunity to flex what I would consider more of an energy muscle. You're tired, but what is it? What is your why there? What is your ultimate outcome there? And then from that place, you can harbor that energy to move forward. But if you're always viewing it as the world is coming at me and I'm responding to the world as compared to, hey, regardless of what comes at me, I'm going to choose to have that intrinsic sense of energy, that intrinsic sense of control, you'll find the way, you'll find the energy, but it's a muscle.
Did you also find yourself, so for instance, let's say, we are like, oh man, I'm a great sleeper. I'm going to go to bed at 9:30. I'm going to have all my lights out. It's going to be cold. It's going to be quiet. Everything's going to be perfect. I'm not going to have eaten in a few hours, et cetera. And then you're traveling the world. That's not really choice. But did you nap a bit? How did you do recovery? Because recovery's less critical necessarily when you're 20, maybe, than when you're a bit older. But it's still a really important element. Did you find ways to kind of, like you say, hack that in your travels?
Yeah, I felt like it was an ongoing lesson. I'm a huge napper. I try to take naps, and I know a good little bit about circadian rhythms and sleep, and now the chronotypes and all of that. And so I would like to think that during my travels, I had some routine around that, especially when I was more rooted in a place for a while. Then yes, I was very routine oriented, but in some days there were days where I was in 2 or 3 different countries in a day.
Right.
I mean, literally. And so it's, but yeah, taking advantage of the little bit. One thing that I really learned is that you might not be able to have it so-called perfect, but what is it that you can leverage? Leverage is huge for me. So if I'm waiting for a flight and I'm sleep deprived and tired, well, if I have some time, that's an opportunity for me to learn. That's an opportunity for me to rest. And just testing that was huge. Just say, hey, 5 minutes. It might not be the hour-long nap that I'm used to, but 5 minutes seems to
huge.
work.
I'm a huge napper. I'm like, if I find, I get a little break, 15, 20 minutes, and it's in the part of the day where you might have a little bit of a dip, I'm diving in, I'm, putting my little alarm on. It's going to ring in 15, 20 minutes and I'm back up, but you're back up and you're different. And, I think that's an opportunity that a lot of people miss out on. And because so often in our society, we think about time as linear, and they're like, how can you take time out of your day when you're supposed to be, these are golden hours, you're supposed to be productive. And you're like, yeah, that's the point. I'm going to be productive because I actually have energy to focus when I get back up again. Otherwise, productivity's down and joy is down. It's not just about producing, it's about really living and being fully engaged. So last part of the Prism we'll touch on here, just as it relates to your travel, is the idea that we stay present, and it's in the space between stimulus and response that we actually have an opportunity to frame our lives and to, look at things and reposition, rename what's going on. So talk to me maybe about some challenges that showed up and how your ability to either frame things or maybe an inability sometime to reframe things impacted your travel.
Sure. So when you're traveling and you're staying at hostels and you're staying with a lot of different people, you're dealing with a lot of different minds, a lot of different ethnicities, a lot of different cultures. And it can be difficult sometimes to try to manage that when your own state and your own personal affairs and you're dealing with family issues back home. That's where meditation for me was that pause between stimulus and response. And oftentimes in my travels, I would just come back to the breath, as simple and as we've all heard it, but coming back to the breath, and in those moments, just pausing. I always say embrace the pause. That's a motto I live by. And in that pause, I check in with myself. I feel my physiology. I feel where my state is. I'm asking myself, what am I focusing on? That's key, because if I'm focusing on something that's bad, well, I'm typically going to feel something bad.
Right.
If I'm focusing on the good, I'm typically going to see the good. And so as simple as that sounds, it can be difficult to practice in the moment. And that's actually one of the greatest takeaways I had from traveling, is that when you're traveling, things come at you very fast. And you have to ask yourself in those moments, okay, this is happening, but how much of this can I control? And often if you just ask a quality question, you'll get a quality answer.
Right.
And almost every single time I'd ask myself that, I'd pause and I say, okay, how much of this can I control?
And we focus right there, right?
The answer was right there. So that pause is huge. And that often comes with those practicing the muscles, whether it's meditation, mindfulness, presence. Presence is really behind everything in coaching and traveling.
Right.
Everything
happens, Ram Dass, right? It's be here now. So the idea is like, thinking of the past, thinking of the future, making up a story, all those things are pulling you out of the present moment, which is the only place you're actually going to experience something, engage with somebody, bring your full best self. And so that's, I think such a big thing. And, travel, and all of us face challenges all the time. And again, one of the things that I find in coaching people, having to help them work through things is understanding that taking the time to reimagine other perspectives, to add vantage points, is such a worthy investment of time. And, sometimes you'll get resistance and but here's really what happened. That's an interpretation of what happened. And there's lots of other ones. How's that one making you feel? Because you got some anger coming out of that one, right? And maybe that's not where you want to be coming from. What else could you look at? How could you look at this as a blessing? Or what is the hidden blessing in here? What could it be? And then when my experience, and, I would imagine yours and so many people that I've worked with, is when you slow down and take that time, all of a sudden you realize that your energy shifts radically, because the story you're telling, the frame that you're creating for your life that you're going to live into, you get a chance to rename it. And then you get an opportunity to live in a much more collaborative or partnering way, rather than feeling like you're in conflict where there's energy fighting against you. So cool with that. So that took you all through your 20s. You traveled all over the world, got a great experiences, met tons of really cool people. And then you approaching your 30s and you're like, I'm ready to dive back in, and I'm going to dive back in the way that was, I've been dreaming about for a long time, impacting people. And your emphasis really looking at men, trying to help them live these integrated full lives where they're thriving in all areas. So let's walk through that. So coming in here, tell me how you really re-engage there.
Yeah, so I was very clear on my why coming back. I knew I wanted to be a life coach. There was no doubt, especially with all the experiences and the insight that I gained on myself and the world. And I came back, I enrolled in IPEC, which was the institute that you had recommended. As life and the universe or God, whatever we want to call it, would have it. My very first coaching opportunity, coaching a woman on a first exercise. Lo and behold, her son was going on a one-way ticket 7 years to the day that I had gone 7 years prior. And you just start to see the signs. Okay, when you're clear on your why, when you start to see those opportunities, the world kind of reaffirms you with those signs. Had a phenomenal experience with that. Came out, started coaching men and entrepreneurs. And the coaching, really one of the best things I love about coaching, and why I recommend so many people to at least try it, is you can only take somebody, as I'm sure you know, as deep as you've gone yourself. So coaching presents an opportunity to be both a teacher and a student, because I have to constantly wake up. If I'm having a bad day, I wake up having a bad day, something's coming at me. Well, I get to control myself because I know it's no longer about me. I have to lead another man or men to their better lives. Well, that's going to be hard for me to do if I'm focusing on how crappy or whatever it is that I'm feeling in that moment. And so that was the greatest attraction to coaching, was that it allowed a vehicle to instill all the beliefs, the practices, all the different things, and instilled a vehicle to not only sharpen that saw, but to do something outside of myself. And I would call that the higher progression of Max was, okay, I've had an amazing life, but in service and in contribution, I can find the vehicles of growth. I can find the vehicles of connection. I can find the vehicles of love and certainty and even uncertainty, because I can live through my clients as well. I've always wanted to do everything, and now I get the opportunity to kind of live through them in certain capacities. So not sure if that answered it, but yeah.
It did in a lot of ways. And one of the things that I would say that I also resonate a lot with is the way you describe that. Is one of the coolest things is like our growth is really in so many ways the driver for our ability to make a difference for others. And, so the intention in our lives, it gives a real purpose to our own continual involvement, which is exciting. If you're, you can travel the world, but you can also travel your emotional topography, right? You can travel and learn and grow and develop in relationships that are right next door to you. And so it's, when you keep that curiosity open, then there's so many different opportunities to have excitement and enthusiasm and novelty and all the things that really drive us into those states of flow that are so enjoyable and really allow us to optimize our lives. So I know that you do a lot of work with the men in really helping to model that and then also lead in that way. So talk to me about the practices now that you are in a more settled world that you have incorporated that you recognize bring you great energy and that you might encourage others to do. Talk to me about the things that you think allow you to optimize yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually.
Sure. So one of the sayings I live by is how you live your days is how you live your life. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that, in my opinion. Granted, there's going to be exceptions. There's going to be those days that come up, but there's a saying I heard that we're rewarded in public with what we practice in private. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I always try to ask myself is, it's a silly little game I play, but if there's a fly on the wall and that fly is me looking in on my life, what do my actions say? If my words couldn't speak, what does my life say about it? So for me, I'm always formulating different practices. So morning routines are huge for me. I work in sales now and work mostly on the Eastern Coast time zone. So I have early mornings, but those mornings of tinkering, okay, what is my mindful practice? What is my gratitude practice? One of the simplest practices that I do for my men and the people I coach is just saying thank you. As soon as you wake up, verbally saying it out loud, saying thank you, counting your blessings. Any version of gratitude practice is paramount to anything that I do, because without that, I don't necessarily experience the joy that comes along with living this life. Because without the gratitude, if you're not thankful for what you have, you're on that hedonistic treadmill of always wanting something more.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And so the simple answer is that morning practices and meditation is very big for me. But included with that is my own experience with my partner and our own shared growth. We often will do things together that are very intentional. Uh-huh. So at night, we'll count our blessings, or we'll say we have a weekly check-in. So these are all little things that I do with her as well. And I'm thankful to have a partner who invests in personal development that really just allows me to center myself and find that center point from which upon I can act with compassion, I can act with service. Right. But without that, you get in your own head and you think about your own place and your own sorrow sometimes.
What I'm listening to and hearing here is a lot of the morning practice is really thinking about, okay, what are the values that I want to live by? And how do I intentionally, essentially seed them in my subconscious every day so that they continue to blossom on their own, right? But if we don't seed them, if we wake up in the morning and I don't have time to express gratitude, or I don't have time to think about compassion or things along those lines, empathy, so then you get in, like you said, the hedonic treadmill or running, whatever it is, or society or chasing or whatever you're doing. And you're not really thinking about like, what are the emotions? What are the values I want to express? Like you said, the fly on the wall, like if somebody, what is someone seeing about your life if they were to have to describe, like, these are the emotions, this is the values that Max is expressing in his life? Would they see the ones that you're like, those are the ones I want to claim, right? Or they would see something different. And one of the big benefits I have found around having a really intentional gratitude practice is it challenges you to, when you know every day that you're going to wake up and identify things you're really grateful for, you look for things you're really grateful for. And, so many people wake up, they're almost like have a spitefulness or, how I got ripped off, and so they wake up in the morning and they can list these are the 10 things I saw yesterday where I was wronged, and you're like, well, did that really serve you? Because what was the energy you experienced? What seems funny to me is so many people don't seem to understand that you are creating your life experience. And if it's anger and upset and frustration and entitlement or whatever it happens to be, that is your life experience. That I don't care what car you're driving or what house you're living in, but that is the experience that you're having regardless. And so it's so important from my perspective. And I think, I hear you saying the same thing. It's taking the time with those morning practices to bookend your day, maybe with the closing it up, right? What was great about today and how did I do? And where did I really show up? And what are some things I could learn? And how do I show up better the next day? And having that intentionality is fun, right? It makes us feel alive. And so many benefits there.
Yes. And I want to add to that, John, is there has been no single practice greater in my entire life than counting my blessings. Right. I remember the very first day I actually took the time to grab a sheet of paper. I'll never forget it. It was the most profound, probably experience of my life and what it taught me. And I remember thinking, okay, well, everybody tells me count my blessings. Yeah, I kind of get it. And I remember on this particular day, it wasn't a bad day, but it wasn't in my mind at that time a great day either. And so I remember just getting down. I was like, okay, well, I could think of like one or two things. And I remember just thinking, okay, well, just allow myself the permission to just engage in this activity. That was my intention. And so I started writing, and I thought I was going to put down the three things that were in my mind. And one of the most beautiful ways to instill a lot of what it is that you talk about in Prism of Perspective is, as I wrote those three things, one more thing came to my mind. And then as I wrote that fourth thing, one more thing came to my mind. And even then, in that moment, I was still a little skeptical. And by the end of it, I had an entire sheet of experiences that I had not brought to consciousness, that I had not brought to conscious awareness at that time, had I not just chose to focus on those one or two or three things that I had remembered. And so it was a profound shift in my psyche and my consciousness at that point to say, okay, well, we get to remember a lot of our experiences if we're focusing on them. And a lot of times we're so focused on the one bad thing that happened that's where our focus drives, and we fail to see all the beautiful things that happened. And then it was beautiful because that became a practice that I've done to this day. I did it religiously every single day for 3 or 4 years, had huge notebooks filed. And it was just so cool to see how my perception of the world changed completely. So somebody held the door for me, and that became a highlight of my day.
Something to think back on, right?
Yeah, something that I was like so thankful for. So it's there really is no words that can express, I think, how profoundly that shift can happen within oneself when they get clear on what it is that they want to focus on. And gratitude being an attitude of gratitude usually magnifies the perspective of a rich life, however we deem that to be.
Did you ever hear Brene Brown talk about gratitude? And so she has a thing in her book, one of her books, I forget which one, where she talks about the difference between an attitude of gratitude and a practice of gratitude. And I think so what you're really talking about is you have a practice of gratitude. And she says, the difference is, she says, she's like, I got a really good yoga attitude. She's like, I got the pants, I got the blocks and the straps. I don't have much of a yoga practice though. So I can't really go do yoga in any real way. She goes, the same thing's true with gratitude. Somebody's like, oh yeah, I have an attitude of gratitude. You're like, well, how are you building that muscle? That's like saying, I have an attitude. I'm a marathoner. I have an attitude of a marathoner. You're like, oh, awesome. Tell me about your training.
Yeah.
Well, I don't train. But I do have an attitude of I'm a runner, And you're like, well, you might want to train a little bit. And so when you engage in that practice on an ongoing basis, again, what it does is it changes what you're looking for. And, you're looking, and the other thing, you ever listen to Vishen Lakhani's stuff on the 6-phase meditation? So when he talks about, there's lots of different ways to do gratitude, and I think it's fun to play around with a bunch of them. But one of the things he talks about is every day, 3 things you're grateful for about your personal life, 3 things you're grateful about your professional life, and then 3 things you're grateful about who you are. And the other thing he says is don't look for that big, huge thing always. Sometimes it's going to be, man, I'm grateful that I have this amazing spouse and she's the most phenomenal thing in the world and changed my life, and et cetera. And sometimes it's going to be like, man, that tea was awesome sitting out, watching the sunset or whatever it happened to be, and what I think is really helpful there is thinking about, I want to be grateful for looking for all of it. Because if all I'm looking for is this big, huge thing, I'm going to miss a lot of the little stuff that can shift the way we feel. But if we get used to looking personally, professionally about ourselves, big, small, other, now we're just really looking for gratitude. And gratitude is one of the big things that really shifts the way we filter the world. When you look at in the flow research world, they talk about gratitude as being one of the key things that really opens you up to flow. Because if you're not in that space and you're in kind of an entitlement or I'm getting wrong space, you're blocking flow. You're blocking your ability to really kind of have this amazing life. So let's talk a little bit about the way that you use the space between stimulus and response in your coaching and how you helped teach people that, if you think that's an area that you spend time in. I'm assuming it probably is.
Yeah. So I think this is a great point. So when you are flexing the strategic muscles of coaching, learning the tools, it can be very attractive for a coach to latch onto those and say, okay, this is the problem. These are the tools to use for that. These are the tactical tools to allow for change in a human being. And there is a place for that, no doubt. Where I consider more of the art of coaching, and really where coaching becomes more of what I would consider more mastery level, is when one can move out of the tools and into just pure presence. The best coaching I've ever done in any person, whether it's a formal practice session or coaching session, or just in life, has come with simply being present. Full stop.
And I think what we can do is kind of flip that on its head in a way and say, when we're not present, it's really almost impossible to do anything other than being like a tactical something they could get out of a book. Right.
Correct.
Like you could get this out of a book, but if you're present with that person, you can help them. And I also find that the more present we are, especially when we're slowing things down, we have those mirror neurons, right? So however you're behaving is automatically impacting the other way the other person is behaving. And so you get an opportunity to kind of model that and slow it down for them. Do you find that one of the great challenges that a lot of people are having is their inability or unwillingness to really reframe things? Because I don't know if you're familiar with the book 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. Are you familiar with that one?
I have not read
awesome.
That one.
Anyway, so one of the things, their big premise, their underlying thing is that the biggest, most important question you ever answer is, do you live above or below the line? Or are you above or below the line? Above the line is open, curious, and committed to learning. Below the line is closed, defensive, and committed to being right. And when we look at our society and we look around, there's so much commitment to being right rather than being open and learning and having wonder. And so in the space between stimulus response, at some level, what you're basically saying is, I'm going to let go. I'm going to hold loosely onto my original interpretation. And I'm going to see what else is there, right? Self-awareness, self-control, empathy, and then power or influence is the way I see those 4 things. And so really having the self-awareness to know, like, okay, right at this moment, I'm triggered and I immediately made up some story about whatever. Let me gain presence, right? Let me find my breath, slow it down, and then control I'm not going to be reactive. I'm going to be responsive. I'm going to have empathy, figure out like where it's going on there. And it's going to give you so much more choice. And if we want to, somebody says they want to, I'm for freedom. Well, this is freedom. It's a freedom to actually decide how you're going to live in each moment. At some level, when you think about the prism of perspective, the flip side of it is the prison of perspective, right? So if I'm stuck in a perspective, I'm attached to the way I see the things, I'm in prison. I don't have freedom, regardless of what else is going on. If you do not have the ability to release and hold loosely, it doesn't have to be you walk away from your beliefs, but you have to hold them loosely enough that you have the freedom to actually observe and consider other perspectives. Otherwise, you're basically reactive. There's an autocracy going on and you created it. There is no freedom. So what are your thoughts on that? How's that resonate with your perception?
So you brought up so many good points, and I couldn't help but to think in that moment about the Zen master and the teacup.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
where the scholar is interrupting him, and for those of you maybe not familiar with it, the scholar is talking, trying to glean the wisdom from a Zen master, and every time the Zen master goes to speak, the scholar interrupts him with his own stories and knowledge and interpretations, and finally the Zen master just starts pouring until it starts overflowing. The scholar says, "What are you doing, Zen master? Can't you see it's overflowed?" And he says, "Yes, exactly. You are like the cup. You're so full of knowledge. You're so preoccupied in your own understandings and your own thoughts of the world that you have no room to take anything else." And so, I think there's so many things. My mind, I was trying to just be present with you there, but in relations to that is the way I would interpret this is to put it in, you can't replace an understanding with presence. Presence simply is, and this might get a little vague or out there, but when you are simply present, you can allow for any myriad of opportunities or perceptions to be present. And then you get to decide in there. But if you're coming to the table preoccupied with your own thoughts about how things should be, or you can't experience the richness of life.
Can't see what is, right?
It really is that prism of white light coming in. And then if you are an open container, you get to see the options before you and then respond appropriately.
And what I love about that whole thing too is how everything seems to slow down, right? It's almost like if you were, things are coming at you. I forget Inception was a movie that did that. And I think when a Keanu Reeves' stuff, everything's kind of slows down. And you have an opportunity to be responsive. Whereas often if we're so attached to our beliefs and we're really reactive, somebody said this, I remember a long time ago, I was listening to this is to show you how long ago, is Glenn Beck was interviewing Deepak Chopra on, I forget what the radio station was, but it was like a primarily liberal radio station, American something or other. And it was near the end of their interview, and Glenn Beck, I thought he had this great question, and maybe he did. And he says to Deepak, "Well, just one more question. In our lives, are we predestined, or do we actually have free choice?" And I had read so much Deepak that I was like, "Oh, free choice all day long." And he actually said, "Well, for most people, their lives are predetermined." And I'm like, "What?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "The reason why is most people are reactive. And so if you're reactive to something that has already happened, you do not have free choice. You're reacting to something that's historical. You can't change the past. And if you're just reacting to it, then you actually are predetermined." Mm. But for those who take the time to respond, their lives are unlimited. And I was like, that was beautiful, So I thought that was a really kind of cool framing on that. So good deal. So one of the other areas both you and I are really passionate about is aging powerfully, right? So one of my things, age powerfully, brilliantly, and joyfully. That's, one of the things that I'm really interested in, and I know you are as well. So tell me more about your interest in that, why you think that's so important. What motivates you around that?
So what motivates me mostly around anything health is the vitality and energy I can bring to life. So there's the saying that a rich man has many wants, but a sick man has only but one, right. And that's health. Health really is the greatest wealth for me, because without health, you cannot experience the richness of life. If you're sick and dying, that's going to be your primary occupation. And one of the things I love about aging, I actually embrace aging. I've completely had a paradigm shift around this, and it didn't come overnight. It took a lot of intentional effort, but aging allows you to take seriously that which you should have maybe taken seriously earlier. Mm-hmm. And if we can understand that aging presents an opportunity, it's not a problem. It's a quality aspect of transition of life. All things are change. Aging, of which is the constant, never-ending change that we experience day to day. It allows you to show how much agency you have over the change that is called aging.
Right.
And one of the most fascinating, and it gives me so much excitement when I feel healthier now. I just celebrated my 35th birthday, and I feel better than I did at 20. And in many ways,
I got good news for you. I'm 60, and I would say I feel better than I really ever. I'm more physically capable at 60 than I've really ever been in my life.
And I believe it. I believe seeing photos of you being able to hold your leg up like this in a full split at 60.
And the thing that when I talk about it, what I want everyone to get is there is zero that is special about me. You know what I mean? It's just incremental, constant, tiny little change that you could never see. And then all of a sudden over time you compound it and you're like, holy shit. Right. And what I find interesting too is we have so many challenges in our society. Right. And so there's so much talent and understanding and genius that's extracted from the playing field because of premature aging. And I don't mean premature versus society. I mean premature versus what it should be. And I'm not saying that there aren't circumstances where, I could have a stroke today, right? And it could change everything. And it wouldn't be my fault. I'm not blaming anyone, but there are lifestyle choices that compound over time that give us the greatest opportunity to thrive for decades beyond what typical society expects. And then you look at it and you say, so don't you want to make an impact? And why do we have so much talent and resources leaving the game early? And some of it's not because of health. Some of it's because they lost connection to their purpose. Right. So if you no longer have a purpose, you're showing up and again, whatever it is you choose to do with your time, does that really light you up, or are you counting time? You're like, oh, I'm super healthy. And so what are you doing with it? And, a lot of the entrepreneurs that I do work with and business owners, part of it is it's an impact, a possibility to continue to impact the world. It's also a possibility to continue to generate untold millions of dollars into the future just because you're still physically viable. Mm-hmm. And to me, that just seems to make so much sense. Plus the experience of living, people are like, oh, I don't even want to live. And I'm like, really? Right now, today, again, at 60, okay, so I feel like I did when I was 20. So at 20, was I thinking I was about to quit? Was I going to retire at 25? No, then why would I retire at 65? Something may change, we do all get older. I'm not, in some fantasy world, but it's way different than most people think. It's way later than most people think. And so we have this perception. I know you're a big Anthony Robbins fan, so am I. I remember a long time ago, I was listening to a thing that he was doing, and he was on stage and he was talking about kind of this concept. And he says, I want you guys to close your eyes and I want you to imagine yourself at 70. Just close your eyes and think of being 70. Think about what it feels like to walk around and, the weight on your body and, maybe the aches and pains and whatever it is. I don't know. He may not have gotten into all that, but he kind of was like, just close your eyes. And then he goes, now open your eyes. And there's a 70-year-old bodybuilder guy there who's shredded and ripped and powerful. He's like, I'm not sure what you were envisioning, but whatever it is, that's where you're headed. And so part of this, society has this belief I remember back 10 years ago, there was a kid that I'd gone to high school with that was in Facebook who was in the hospital for diabetes or something. And he had his leg up and, they were doing some surgery or whatever it was. And he was like, but I'm in pretty good shape for my age. And I'm thinking, dude, you're 50. What do you mean you're in good shape for your age? You're laying in the hospital right now. Mm-hmm. You're not in good shape for your age. Again, for him and everyone, you still have an opportunity to change that. It would have been nicer to change it when you're 20, but wherever you are, whatever moment it is, engage and begin this easy, incremental, compounding improvement. And it just gets great,
Sure. And with the simple fact that the skin on your body is replaced every 30 days, there's no part of you that has been you from when you were born. Right. Not a single part.
Right.
And people beat themselves up and they say, okay, I want to have this chiseled body or this chiseled abs. I always suggest anybody who's looking to get into health, like holistic health across the board, is just start with what makes you feel good. Right. Your body will tell you. And then use that as a feedback mechanism to try to constantly tinker and just you'll have a different set point, a different baseline, and the health and the vitality that you can bring to life magnifies everything you experience. My normal day in a healthy state is probably what somebody who's in poor health would experience on their best days.
Right. And probably not. They probably can't ever get there.
Exactly. And that only came from, as you said, I love that you said small monumental changes. I mean, I've flipped the script on diets. I've done every little thing. And when you can have fun with it and no longer see it as something that you need to do in order to feel this, and you can say, I have the opportunity. I don't have to, I get to use my body, and I'm no different than you. I'm not special at all. I remember before I worked out, I was this skinny little thing, and had a lot of adverse react. I was like, I don't want to get into lifting weights and stuff like that. And then you realize just how good you feel and how powerful you feel. And it magnifies. It's a wonderful thing.
There's a time, my wife and I are both, fairly interested, my wife's in functional medicine. And so that we, pay attention to what we eat and we exercise, do those things and take care of ourselves. And I remember there was a person in our life who we're both gluten-free. She's gluten-freer than I am. I'm gluten-free-ish. But anyway, so we were having this conversation and they were going to have whatever. And we were like, well, you really can't eat this. And this individual person who happens to not have good vitality at all, really not healthy, significantly overweight, no energy, doesn't move a whole lot, said something along the lines of, I just don't know how you guys make those sacrifices. And I thought to myself, really? So I'm not eating gluten, but there's very little other things I'm not doing. You know what I mean? I'm like, okay, but you're giving up all of that so you can eat gluten? Really? And again, everybody has their own health choices and things along those lines. Gluten's not really good for very many people, by the way.
I agree.
Right. So, you figure out like what makes you feel good and really what works for you. And there's a lot of information out there and you can take it on. And everything, like you said, like the gratitude. So the first day you had it, but the thing is you've done it over and over again, right? The compassion, you do it every day. You think about what are the values I want to live. You do those things every day. You do the exercise. And I think you said, the way you live your day is the way you live your life, or pretty close to that, right? Mm-hmm. The habits that we create our lives, and you get to choose them. And for a little brief period of time, there's an amount of willpower that goes in there, and then it's on automatic. Mm-hmm. And the healthy food that you eat, if you choose to eat healthy, tastes just as good to you. Better probably, and it feels better than, the processed, whatever it happens to be. And again, I'm not at all saying I'm like perfect in this way, but those things they're not sacrifices. And the rewards the ROI on this is so high that it is challenging when if we think about society. So let's do some quick math, right? So we spend about 20% of our GDC on healthcare.
Yeah, and growing.
Right.
Exponentially.
Yeah, growing, still continuing to grow, 20% of our GDC. And so that's about $3 trillion a year, right?
Yeah.
And most of it is, they say around 80% or so is based on lifestyle. And so if we look at our, somebody's like, oh my God, we're running a deficit. Okay. We're spending $2.4 trillion that we don't have to spend. Just balance the budget. Yay. Right? And again, some of that's being spent personally, some of it's being spent by the government, but a lot of it's being spent by the government because when do you get sick? You get sick when you're, the other thing, like private insurance versus public. So you're like, okay, so the private insurance companies, and I'm not trying to say that there's anything wrong with that, but they basically insure you till they think you're going to get sick. And then they hand you off to Medicare. They're like, oh, wait, this guy's about to get sick. I collected the premiums. Let me give the money back over. I don't want to pay that. And so when we look at it again, there's just personal economic ability to create income, economic demand because your health is starting to diminish. And all of it just comes down to really simple little choices that each of those little choices make every moment more enjoyable. The payoff is everywhere. Win, 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 win.
Yes. And one of the greatest ways you can show up for your loved ones.
Yeah.
We've all experienced our loved ones, especially as they get older. And we're always going to want to be there for our loved ones. And at the same time, we have a choice in how others can show up for us. I feel one of the greatest ways you can love and give love is to treat your body to the best of your abilities within reason.
Right.
If there's something to be said about being so anal retentive about your health that you are worry wart that creates a whole other slew of problems downstream. But the ability to be healthy for our loved ones and to be present and healthy, if that is one of the greatest gifts you can give, just like presence is one of the greatest gifts that we're dying for in this age. We're dying for presence. At the same time, we're dying to be healthy. And so we owe it to our loved ones.
My mom has been diminishing mentally for quite some time. So she's been in nursing home and now memory care for, I think she's been nursing home for about 12 years and memory care for 7. And so she's really, as you might imagine, pretty significantly diminished. And, there's different elements that play into that. But a lot of the research today around dementia and Alzheimer's indicates that too is very much in our choice. I can't recall the two. There's a husband and wife that are neurologists, and they coined a acronym that I thought was super cool because it's easy to remember. But it's neuro as it relates to avoiding. Yeah, and it stands for nutrition, exercise, unwind, recover, and optimize. Right. So certain foods you can eat. You should eat. These are better foods than other foods. We know that, most of us could name them pretty well. Exercise, cardiovascular strength, challenging your body to coordinate movements causes neurons to fire and neuroplasticity and right. So all the things that you challenge yourself to do physically make you better. Unwind, de-stress, right? What are you doing to unwind? What are you doing to recover? What's your recovery programs look like? And then optimize is really the idea of whatever you're physically capable of and mentally capable, just keep expanding that. A way I see the world is that we are like our own little universe, and the universe continues to expand all the time. And so do we. And so when we look at what's like optimize, think about how do you continue to become sharper rather than thinking your mental capacity is going to diminish. No, how do you keep getting sharper? How do you continue to have better balance? How do you improve your coordination? How do you do those things? And as we continue to strengthen that, it makes the brain work. It makes neurons fire, and then when the neurons are firing, you're avoiding a future nobody wants to have. Now, if we don't look at it, right, we're like, I'm not going to look at that thing that might happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's not going to happen. You may not be bothered by it right now, but if you look at what's going on in society, there is a tremendous amount of diminishment cognitively. And if we can play a role in delaying or deterring that, I don't know who doesn't want to do that, right? And so that's
absolutely.
So anyway,
there's so much research to show that so much of that is within our control. I was just reading a book, Outlive, I think it's called.
Oh yeah, yep.
Yeah,
awesome.
It's phenomenal, the research around that.
What did you like most about that book?
I really like his stance on not prescribing the perfect set of this is what you need to do in order to be healthy. Rather, these are the things we should be looking at amongst the context of your life, your age, where you're at. And that to me, just like with my coaching clients, I don't try to necessarily say this is the 12-point rules to happiness. Rather, what are your values and how can we strengthen those? And so I like his approach to kind of feed you information without you taking it as this as a scroll to perfect ideal health. So he does a good job with that.
Another thing that I love the book. I love the book too. Another thing I really liked is his whole idea was about optimization, right? It's like, how do you drive your health as high as possible? And how do you start really young, starting to pay attention to these things because you can pivot earlier. The other thing, as a shout out to Peter Attia, he did a remarkable job, in my opinion, describing so many physiological effects in the health system as it related to the way arteriosclerosis works and, heart disease and Alzheimer's disease and cancer. I just thought he did a remarkable job. Like, I walked out of reading that book and going, wow, I actually thought I knew that before. and I came out with a good understanding. So there's a shout out to Peter. I hope the book's been awesome and had really positive impact for so many people. I want to just say thanks so much, Max. We met when you were quite young, and it was interesting. You were there at the karate studio or the martial arts studio, picking up your brother. My daughters were there, and it was funny that we engaged over the Tim Ferriss book, remember, 4-Hour Workweek, and just kind of looking at that. And it's been fun to evolve with you. And I really appreciate you taking the time out. It's been great, again, sharing your insights. And I appreciate that so much.
It's been a pleasure, John. Thank you for having me. And you've been an amazing source of light and a mentor for me for quite some times. And it's
Likewise.
amazing to be here with you. So Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Have a good one.
You too.